A guitar twangs in the darkness, and the spotlight lands on a face millions thought they knew. But behind those familiar lyrics and rhinestone suits, whispers of covert missions and classified files rustle like sheet music caught in a sudden wind. Imagine the Cold War heating up in smoky bars, radar rooms, and backstage corridors, while the very voices that sang about heartbreak quietly tuned in to enemy chatter or carried coded comfort to soldiers overseas. Tonight, we peel back that velvet curtain and walk through 13 lives where stardom tangled with rumor and where every chord might mask a secret signal. Listen close, because some tales are confirmed by dusty service records while others flicker as secondhand recollections from crew members who helped define American music during its most anxious era. From Memphis press agents to Langley analysts, cables flew about these performers, each draft vetted for tone, timing, and subtle ideological push. This is the forgotten duet between Nashville and national security, a clandestine melody humming beneath the mainstream charts. Johnny Cash stepped onto the world stage with a baritone so deep it sounded forged in a coal mine, yet years before he became the Man in Black, he sat in a cramped West German intercept station, headphones pressed tight, jotting down dots and dashes bleeding from Soviet transmitters. The official paperwork calls him an Air Force Morse operator, but veterans swear Cash was no ordinary listener. One night in March 1953, as Moscow kept quiet about Stalin's collapse, Cash allegedly caught the shuttered transmission that tipped Allied analysts to seismic tremors inside the Kremlin. Did he fully grasp the weight of that discovery? Friends later recalled that he carried a strange stillness, as if he had peered through a keyhole into history. Whether the Pentagon ever debriefed him on that intercept remains buried, but the story shadows every tremor in his later music, a restless, rumbling insistence that the truth is never silent. He joked later that Morse was just long-distance gossip. Some go further, saying he relayed an intercepted call mentioning a leadership vacuum, data that reached Eisenhower's desk by sunrise. Whether folklore or fact, Cash's memory for rhythmic patterns trained him for songwriting, turning radio static into poetic cadence. Cash never displayed any classified souvenirs publicly. Perhaps they lie locked in a Tennessee keepsake box, meaning still classified. Kristofferson, poet, rebel, Rhodes Scholar, also wore the olive drab of an Army Ranger, flew helicopters in the burning Louisiana heat, and taught cadets at West Point before Nashville ever heard his red dirt rasp. West Point colleagues note that he showed up with a mind for encrypted logistics, slipping effortlessly between academic theory and razor-sharp mission drills. The whispers say he accepted a hush-hush assignment ferrying command staff above the Panama Canal's lush barricades, learning flight paths reserved for covert insertions. In letters home, he wrote cryptic lines about night work with no stars, a phrase family assumed was poetic flourish. When Kristofferson finally traded fatigues for folk clubs, he kept that disciplined posture. Fellow songwriters noticed he plotted verse structures on legal pads like mission briefs, adding navigational headings in the margins. Some say the muscle memory of chalking flight grids never left him. It merely shifted from coordinates to chorus lines, mapping heartbreak with the precision of a sortie schedule. Don Williams earned the nickname Gentle Giant, his voice a hush of warm summer nights. But that calm hides a tenure in the Army Security Agency, the hush-hush branch tasked with eavesdropping on Warsaw Pact radios. ASA veterans described technicians pulling graveyard shifts, antennas pointed toward Iron Curtain static, cataloging frequencies nobody would admit existed. Legend claims Williams once intercepted a scrambled plea from a downed reconnaissance plane and guided rescue aircraft by relaying coordinates through a civilian frequency, saving several airmen. In interviews, he avoided direct confirmation, offering only a gentle smile and a melodic hum that ended the topic. Fans chalked it up to humility, but one retired colonel said, "That smile masked a steel trap memory." Years later, during a televised award show, Williams ad-libbed a line about voices in the air that never land, a cryptic nod that left broadcasters stumped and old colleagues trading knowing glances. Stony Edwards fought his way up from oil field grit to the Opry spotlight, yet rewind a decade, and you find him hunched over a military radio console, fingers dancing across dials set to classified. His training made him fluent in crackling whispers that never made the papers. Fellow servicemen nicknamed him Storyteller Stony because he spun thrilling yarns to keep morale afloat during blackout drills. Some of those tales involved secret islands peppered with radar domes where he swore the jukeboxes only played static until a friendly operator tapped in a code song. When pressed, he'd chuckle and change the subject. After the war, Edwards' first studio session reportedly paused while he retuned the mixing board's frequency dials, claiming the room's humming wrong, a habit from nights spent chasing ghost signals. Engineers shrugged, and he delivered a take so haunting that nobody dared question his intuition again. June Carter Cash bounced across continents with humor sharp enough to slice tension, sharing makeshift stages with Johnny in places where embassy walls bristled with microphones. Officially, she was pure morale, a singing lifeline for troops starved for home, but diplomats respected how she slipped past linguistic barriers with a raised eyebrow and a mountain-drawled joke. One East Berlin cultural attaché reportedly called her dangerously likable, a phrase that sounds harmless until you remember ideology can unravel over a single irresistible laugh. During a stop in Seoul, intelligence officers allegedly briefed her on local sentiment, then asked her to weave certain hopeful phrases into stage banter. Audience surveys showed a noticeable uptick in pro-American sentiment after her performance, data promptly filed under psychological operations. She once quipped that her jokes were vetted by 3 governments, and insiders who knew the briefing protocols found the humor a bit too on target. Patsy Klein's voice could bend iron emotion into velvet ease, and according to long-lost memos, she nearly wielded that talent as a State Department instrument. In the early 60s, planners sketched a goodwill tour to counter Soviet cultural offensives, banking on Klein's universal appeal to thaw suspicious audiences. Some archivists believe her smoky rendition of Sweet Dreams was slated to debut at a Moscow cultural fair, its lilting refrain chosen to humanize American ambition. Deeper in the files is a draft set list annotated with Cyrillic notes, presumed translations for Soviet attendees. The plane crash that ended her life also grounded the entire operation, leading analysts to scribble margin notes fretting over lost soft power asset. In that shadow, conspiracy theorists still puzzle over whether mechanical failure alone felled the aircraft or whether darker hands interfered with a plan deemed too effective. Anita Carter, the quiet river between flashier sisters, carried a dulcimer and a diplomatic smile on tours stretching from London parlors to Far East bazaars. Archival tour budgets list government facilitation grants, the soft phrase masking a state-aligned push to flood radios with Americana. Her passport bore so many entry stamps that customs agents once mistook her for a courier, which, in a sense, she was. State Department observers credited her rendition of Appalachian ballads with diffusing tension in Manila after an anti-U.S. protest. One cable remarks on local youths humming her tune outside an embassy gate the morning after her show, a small victory chalked up to hearts and minds. Anita never knew that slip of paper existed, but she understood intuitively that music could soften an argument faster than any official communique. Loretta Lynn, daughter of a coal miner, performed for troops so frequently that some soldiers joked she logged more flight miles than a B-52. Base commanders loved her straight-shooting charisma. Psychological ops officers loved the way her lyrics about resilience meshed with pamphlets they were dropping across contested borders. During one Pacific tour, she reportedly ad-libbed a heartfelt message over armed forces radio that commanders later flagged as an unscheduled morale burst. Psychological memos praised her authentic vernacular as more persuasive than scripted propaganda. Lynn never needed classified access to influence morale. Her presence alone could stiffen a weary spine. Yet insiders recount evenings after the show when she mingled with officers long past curfew, eyes sparkling as if deciphering the shape of the next day's news. Tammy Wynette's anthem about standing by a man rang through Washington's corridors, granting her entry to glittering banquets where policy heavyweights traded predictions over crystal goblets. Gossip columns focused on gowns, but conspiracy buffs note the timing. These receptions often coincided with hush-hush appropriations briefings. After such dinners, she sometimes received cryptic thank you notes referencing clarity and chaos, suggesting her music stabilized fracturing negotiations. A fringe theory claims a certain ambassador's playlist of Wynette's songs helped diffuse a tense arms-sharing dispute in the Mediterranean. True or not, the image of Wynette crooning in the background while diplomats hashed out telemetry agreements feels oddly plausible, the perfect soundtrack for high-stakes theater played in a minor key. George Jones enlisted in the Marines at 17, landing in post-war California just as the Pentagon ramped up surveillance infrastructure along the Pacific Rim. Training records confirm clearance to maintain secure communication gear, experience that later colored his restless moods. One shore leave weekend, he joined a hush meeting where civilian contractors explained early computer encryption. Jones barely followed the math, but he remembered the rhythm of their typing and later worked it into his guitar picking. Years later, engineers measuring the cadence of his biggest hit noted an uncanny alignment with Bodo code spacing, a coincidence fans chalk up to chance, but cryptologists grin at as subconscious residue. The Marine who once monitored secure comms might have encoded that work ethic into every blue note he bent. Willie Nelson joined the Air Force hoping to see the world, but chronic back pain led to an early discharge. Still, paperwork shows evaluators noting his uncanny memory for frequencies and cipher rhythms. Scuttlebutt asserts that instructors considered funneling him into cryptoanalysis before medical boards intervened. Decades later, he released a cheeky concept album that referenced signals in the smoke, prompting interviewers to ask if it was a wink at those rumors. Nelson grinned behind tinted glasses and offered a single sentence. "Sometimes you play a song only satellites can hear." Whether that meant spy satellites or late-night FM stations remains an open question, and whenever these tales resurface, Willie leans back, adjusts his bandana, and lets the legend ride shotgun. Hank Snow's international itinerary reads like NATO's morale map, spanning Arctic bases, Mediterranean ports, and jungle outposts where soldiers waited months for a reminder of home. Officially, he was nothing more than a traveling minstrel, but correspondence between coordinators suggests Snow's crew delivered morale surveys and infrastructure status updates tucked alongside guitar strings. Snow's meticulous tour diaries list local snacks, crowd reactions, and odd footnotes like base morale rating, high, supply chain looks tight. Details far beyond a performer's normal scope. Analysts later confirmed those comments matched classified readiness assessments from the same facilities. That down-home charm gave him access to grumbles officers never put in reports. Snow turned them into secret verses, humming troop sentiment back to strategists who craved unvarnished truth. Glenn Campbell cut an all-American silhouette with that sun-bright grin, and his government-sanctioned tours to Saigon, Berlin, and beyond fed gossip that he doubled as informal eyes and ears. He claimed he learned chords by watching radar sweeps blink in tempo, an origin tale fans cherish. During an Asian tour, several photographs show Campbell boarding a diplomatic aircraft normally reserved for code pouches, not guitars. Photographers captioned it "celebrity perk," but station chiefs recognized the plane's manifest usually read blank. One rumor alleges Campbell delivered a magnetic reel containing field recordings of local propaganda, analysis fodder for Psy-War specialists. When asked decades later, he simply said, "I was just bringing music home," leaving the rest to echo in the gaps between words. 13 voices, 13 mirrored worlds where the blue glow of a console or the hush of a guarded corridor bled into rhinestone glamour. Some records survive in plain sight, stamped and signed. Others drift as rumors, as fragile as stage smoke, yet they share a single undercurrent. During the Cold War, music and strategy danced closer than the public ever guessed. Each artist carried melodies that comforted millions, but perhaps they also carried coded echoes of black-inked briefings long since redacted. The next time a classic country song drifts through a diner, consider the invisible contrails its singer may have etched across geopolitics. History often arrives disguised, and in the age of transistor radios and shadow diplomacy, these 13 performers blurred the border between anthem and intel packet. Their biographies show that culture is never just decoration. Sometimes it is a stealth aircraft painted in chord changes, looping above contested terrain. The records spin on, stylists tracing wax grooves, and somewhere between the notes, those old frequencies still hum. Their stories still echo today. Years after the Iron Curtain finally slammed into museum storage, archivists pried open filing cabinets whose hinges squealed like a steel guitar bend, and found cables reading more like tour itineraries than intelligence briefings. Wherever a marquee voice arrived, surveillance tallies improved, defectors stepped forward, or local papers printed suddenly friendly editorials. Correlation is not proof. Yet the rhythm was irresistible. Music moved borders the way tide pulls sand. Historians debating culture versus covert action note that a heartbreak chorus needs no translation. Guards may seize pamphlets but still tap their boots when a forbidden melody slips from a transistor. Intelligence planners exploited that weakness long before soft diplomacy filled lecture halls. They hid radio relays inside cargo crates, financed talent exchanges labeled artistic friendship, and routed embassy budgets toward portable amplifiers. Some singers were oblivious, a few sensed the pattern and silently adjusted set lists, letting crescendos hit just as clandestine operatives slipped through shadowed checkpoints, guided by the roar of applause. Consider the Berlin air corridors ostensibly reserved for food and fuel. Flight manifests from 1961 list refrigerated crates marked stage gear aboard military transports. Freight clerks later admitted the boxes carried neon lights and lap steel guitars bound for pop-up concerts in drafty hangars. A morale blitz timed for evenings when East Block jamming peaked. The roar of applause ricocheted off concrete and crept across the wall, louder than any loudspeaker warning. Then came the unmarked letters. Performers received envelopes with no return address containing set list suggestions that doubled as coded status reports. An encore of a certain upbeat anthem signaled local agents were safe. A switch to a minor key ballad flagged danger. Many artists dismissed the notes as quirky fan mail. Others recognized the pattern and tucked the directives into costume pockets, reasoning that a 3-minute tune carried less collateral damage than a bullet. Studio halls weren't immune. Engineers at a celebrated Nashville facility recall graveyard shift bookings paid in cash, during which uniformed technicians inserted ultrasonic chirps into gospel outtakes. Pressed to vinyl and shipped abroad as relief records, the tracks relayed bursts of data readable with modified consumer turntables. Inspectors seldom listened long enough to notice anything beyond gentle background hiss. The trick was equal parts espionage and entrepreneurship. The label sold 10,000 copies, and every spin pushed encrypted pulses into enemy ether. Was it ethical to weaponize art? Critics insist purity suffered, yet survivors from both sides recall the era differently. One former East German radio operator confided that smuggled Western songs kept his spirit alive each winter night. Eventually, those melodies convinced him to defect. For him, harmony proved stronger than propaganda. When the final border station dimmed its floodlights, these voices slid back onto ordinary stages, greeted not as operatives but as custodians of a soundtrack that outlasted barbed wire and ideology. Today, digital age listeners stream those classic tracks unaware that the faint crackle beneath a trumpet flourish once whispered coordinates. Remastered box sets polish away the hidden chirps, yet collectors with vintage gear still detect blips tucked between verses, time capsules of tension pressed into 7-inch vinyl. University seminars dissect those frequencies, not to condemn singers but to chart the improbable alliance that transformed flat-top guitars into roaming couriers. That academic curiosity keeps the story alive for a generation raised on satellite pings rather than shortwave static, reminding them that every era hides its own codes. The melody lingers, and so does the secret, and perhaps new secrets wait in plain sight,